Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I want to look at the weekend of September the 27th and 28th, 2025. As far as my topic is concerned, I want to consider the recent shooting at an ICE office in Dallas, which took place on Wednesday. ICE, by the way, stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Two people were killed, I think. The shooter and one other person, and so by recent standards, the shooting was not especially dramatic, and the body count wasn't especially large. But I think there were some sort of interesting things astrologically going on that it's worth taking note of. Also, it's an opportunity to look at the horoscope of ICE, when ICE was formed in 2003. But before I look at all that, I want to consider the astrology and I Ching for the weekend. So here is the chart for the weekend, set for midnight on Sunday, New York time. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So as far as this chart is concerned, the moon is right in the middle of Sagittarius. That means really that the moon is moving through this sign, all weekend long. And as far as the aspects are concerned, the moon starts the weekend with an opposition to Uranus, just as it's moving into Sagittarius. Then it makes a sextile to Pluto, a sextile to the Sun. So that's on Saturday, Moon sextile Sun, and that sextile to Sun. It's always good to have the moon and the Sun making that fortunate aspect, two signs apart. Even when the moon moves beyond that sextile to the Sun, having the moon in Sagittarius, Sun in Libra, that's good. I mean, it's a helpful relationship. Sagittarius and Libra, they don't really clash with each other. And sort of moving on, the moon makes a square to Venus, and its final aspect this weekend, the moon makes a sextile to Mercury on Sunday. Now, as far as non-lunar aspects are concerned, there is a sesquiquadrate between Mercury and Uranus. So you can see this. Mercury is 16 degrees Libra, and Uranus is at 135 degrees away. So that aspect, it could represent, a certain amount of mental energy. We want something to happen, and our mind is busy, and we might get sort of easily excited. And Mercury is a planet of communication, so it can be about what we say, and we might sort of say things very quickly without thinking them through. Especially as the moon is in Sagittarius. One thing about the moon in Sagittarius is it can be quite tactless. It says the first thing that comes to mind. And as far as Sagittarius is concerned, it's just being honest. You might as well reveal the truth. It's no harm if you're telling the truth. But sometimes moon in Sagittarius can get misinterpreted. And so, yes, with Mercury sesquiquadrate Uranus, perhaps we have to be careful what we say. And on the other hand, if we keep things to ourselves, well, we might just get tense and nervous. So maybe we need to think about what we do with our ideas, and particularly if we're feeling under pressure, how do we get the message out? Then on Sunday, Mars is making a biquintile to Saturn, and Mars biquintile Saturn, 144 degrees apart. So Mars and Saturn as a pair can be rather grim. They can take things seriously. They can look at things in the worst possible light, and they can focus on the negative. But this is a biquintile, and that means is that it's something about what we're trying to express and what we're trying to create deliberately. So some of us might feel that we have to come as being perhaps more negative than we actually are, sort of deliberately focusing on the darker side of things, because it's the image we want to create. And there may be some value in that. Perhaps if other people are being too happy, too relaxed about the future, perhaps a bit complacent, Mars biquintile Saturn can make the decision to sort of end the party. And it's a very conscious decision, because this is a biquintile. And so that's the picture for in New York. If we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, the chart isn't really very different. The moon, as always, is a bit earlier in the sign, but I don't think there are any real differences that need to be commented on. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system, and Mercury is making a trine to Jupiter. So Mercury in Scorpio, heliocentric Scorpio, making a trine to Jupiter in Cancer, and that means that communication should be relatively easy, and we can perhaps contrast that with the geocentric Mercury sesquiquadrate Uranus. So Mercury sesquiquadrate Uranus, geocentric, can be not so easy. Yeah, we've got things to say, but the way the words come out may be difficult and rather clumsy. Though with Mercury trine Jupiter, it's a different picture, and there's a certain purity to it. And so, if we say the right thing, and if we speak in accordance with the times in which we're living, then maybe things will be okay, and we won't get too much of a negative reaction from whatever it is that we have to say. And turning to Saturn semisextile, Saturn sextile Uranus, that Saturn sextile Uranus heliocentric is getting really very close now. Saturn is now only 5 arc minutes away from a sextile of Uranus. So, that sextile, I've been sort of monitoring it as it gets closer and closer, and it just could be a time when we can bring things down to earth, and it does allow us to sort of contrast to the revolutionary spirit of Uranus with the desire for structure of Saturn. And so when they're coming together as a sextile, maybe it is a time to sort of bring down some of our ideas, and if we want things to change, we can make them change, and at the same time we can create changes which are revolutionary but are also permanent. And so for many of us, that Saturn sextile Uranus could be quite settling, though maybe we shouldn't think about it as a sextile. With these heliocentric aspects, it may just be that there's a contact between Saturn and Uranus, and a contact between Saturn and Uranus can indicate tension at a time when geocentrically we've got Mercury sesquiquadrate Uranus. So some of us might feel on edge this weekend, as if something has to change, but maybe we're not quite sure what. So let me now switch to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of September the 27th and 28th, 2025. Aries. The moon continues moving through Sagittarius, and as a result, there's plenty to keep you busy, there's plenty to keep you amused, and there's really no excuse for being bored. The moon is at least in a fire sign. That does give you the spark that you sometimes need. And additionally, Aries, you have a chance to explore new things. So if you're not quite satisfied with the way things are, you can move things further. You can sort of move on to new territory. And yeah, you shouldn't be afraid of embracing the new. I mean, it's there to be discovered. And maybe this is what you need. And perhaps you can also be experimental in terms of what you say. And it's always interesting to know how people are going to react. I mean, sometimes I think Aries does like a reaction. They want to see what happens. I can remember sort of long ago an Aries, but I remember this, someone sort of sleeping on a couch, and I had an Aries friend, and he was flicking matches at him, and just these flaming matches were just crossing the room, and he was just trying to get a reaction. And I think he was flicking matches at a Taurus, and this Taurean was just lying on this couch doing nothing, and I was just watching. I was a Gemini watching. Anyway, nothing happened, but Aries was looking for a reaction. Definitely wanted a reaction out of a Taurus, but I don't think he got it. So that is something you might want. So what kind of reaction are you looking for? I mean, it should ideally be constructive and should be informative. It's not just about curiosity. And so by probing, by saying things which might be ever so slightly controversial, that might be a good thing to do. Though, as the weekend progresses, things, Aries, might get more serious because Mars, your ruler, is starting to move towards a biquintile of Saturn. So biquintile, that's an 144-degree aspect. And so that's very much about what you are trying to create. And you may reach the conclusion that in order to have maximum impact, you do need to be quite serious, even a bit grim, perhaps focusing on the negative. Maybe this is a good way to get a reaction. Telling people what could go wrong, giving the impression that things aren't great, that things could be moving from bad to worse. And you might, with this Mars biquintile Saturn, just be deliberately creating a pessimistic style, and a style which focuses on things which are negative, like death and destruction, and the fact that none of us are going to be alive forever. And that might be the way to deal with this Mars biquintile Saturn. Might sound not very nice, but it might suit your purposes very well. And austerity is another way of looking at Mars Saturn, and perhaps you can emphasize austerity, perhaps in the way you dress, the way you account for yourself, and the kind of things you want to talk about. And so that seriousness could serve your purposes quite well. And again, it is about getting a reaction, seeing how people respond. And it may be that you feel that you need to bring people down to earth and make people realize how serious things are. So it could be, Aries, that the weekend starts on sort of quite a light-hearted approach, and you're not really trying to be too serious. But as the weekend progresses, as you move sort of perhaps into Sunday, as you start to contemplate the new week, a certain grimness may grip you, but a grimness you're quite happy about. You don't seem to be particularly bothered about it. Other people, how they respond to you, well, that's a different matter. Taurus, you know that nothing can be taken for granted, and that is perhaps the nature of being a Taurus. I mean, Taurus by definition is quite a down-to-earth sign, and you realize that everything has a limit. It's got a shelf life, and nothing lasts forever. And that is the way of life. Growth and decay are just there, and you just need to accept it. Everyone else needs to accept it. So when you're thinking about what's evolving around you, you have to perhaps take a down-to-earth approach, or rather you feel you need to take a down-to-earth approach, being very Taurean about it. And your reactions could be, they could be quite guarded in their own way. You don't want to give away too much, and if you were to give away too much, you might come over as being somewhat clumsy, and you know that. And so it's perhaps better in some respects that you maintain your own counsel, and that means having a healthy skepticism, towards other people and what they can do. But it's also the case that the less you give away, the stronger you are. I think that's probably the case. If you keep things to yourself, if you keep people guessing, then I think that you will start to get respect. Because the thing is that if you say something, whatever it is, you are making yourself vulnerable. You are putting yourself in a situation where you can be analysed, and people might understand things about you which perhaps you don't want them to understand. And so I think it is a case of the less said the better. And all the while you can spend time trying to work out what is going on, especially on an emotional level. There are complicated undercurrents unfolding, and the more you know about them, the more you can appreciate them, the better. And at the same time, you are mindful of the fact that Mars is moving through Scorpio. You're still getting used to Mars moving through Scorpio. Mars moving through your opposite sign. And so with Mars moving through Scorpio, you're certainly aware of other people's strengths, and you therefore don't want to put yourself into a situation where you're giving too much away. And that goes back to what I was saying about not talking too much. If you talk too much and you create a situation where you are being questioned, then that might mean that people who are actually stronger than you, at least in the short term, may be able to take advantage of the situation. And with Mars moving through Scorpio, it's still making a square to Pluto. And so Mars square Pluto, you do understand the power equation. You understand who has the power, and deep down that right now you're not as powerful as you should be. And you can try to argue. I think you've been quite good at arguing recently. I think you've been quite good at expressing yourself and telling people how you feel, but it's still there. But I just don't think it's going to be quite as strong as it used to be. And rather than being confrontational, if you do have to talk, just try to bring up subjects which are not controversial, which are perhaps more descriptive rather than analytical. And in that way, you can make a reasonable impression, but you don't want to fight your battles today, of this weekend. It's not a weekend for battles, because I think if you were to fight a battle over the weekend, I think you might come out the loser. But it's your choice. You don't have to, and I think it might just be a time to really sort of bide your time and sort of let things develop, and let other people flex their muscles, and if you're not at war with them, that shouldn't be a problem, should it? Gemini, you're still feeling the air grand trines. They're still very much around. The Sun still trine Uranus, still trine Pluto, and Mercury in Libra. Mercury's in an air sign, so there is a grand trine feel to it all, and that continues to be uplifting. And I hope that you are really thinking things through and enjoying yourself as much as is possible. And it's important to be positive and to continue to be positive. Now, that might not always be easy, as I'll discuss in a moment, but this grand trine, you could argue that it's being sort of reactivated by the fact that the moon is now in Sagittarius, and so on Saturday the moon will be making an opposition to Uranus, and it will be making a sextile to Pluto, and that's all good. And then by the end of the weekend you've got moon sextile Mercury, moon sextile your ruling planet, and this might mean that you can perhaps benefit from the influence of other people. The moon is in Sagittarius, it is in your opposite sign, so you don't have to do everything on your own, and it's absolutely possible that you can get inspiration and support from other people. That moon in Sagittarius in a fire sign, sometimes Geminis need a bit of fire. Geminis can do a lot of thinking, and they can have all sorts of ideas, but are they able to put them into practice? Are they able to make them exciting? And perhaps that moon in Sagittarius gives you a sort of a counterpoint. It perhaps encourages you to take things further, and maybe you can take things further as a result of another person's intervention. And so Gemini, don't feel that you have to do everything on your own, and don't keep things too hidden. I mean, you might feel you want to, but now that the moon is in Gemini, the moon is in Sagittarius, I think that's unnecessary. And if you tell people about your ideas, you discuss what's on your mind, you might get some interesting feedback, and indeed you might get an interesting reaction. And at the same time, Gemini, why it might be a good idea to be with people, to discuss things with people, is that if you spend your time alone sort of ruminating, and you might ruminate because there's a lot of mental activity, but mental activity can go too far. If you do too much thinking, what starts as a sort of very positive thought may all of a sudden become negative, and you might suddenly start thinking that things aren't looking so good, and you might start to consider the worst possible scenarios because you're thinking too much. And by the end of the weekend there is a biquintile between Mars and Saturn, and I think that this Mars Saturn biquintile might have an influence on you. And the reason for that is that Mercury is square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Now, that might not be sort of immediately obvious, but the Mars-Saturn midpoint is, I think, at around 16 Capricorn. And we know that Mars-Saturn are already in biquintile. And so Mercury, when it squares the Mars-Saturn midpoint, that may encourage you to really start to look at things in a different way. Now, this needn't necessarily be a bad thing. It depends how you handle it. Now, if you don't show any discipline, if you're not constructive, there is a danger that at some stage in this weekend, that Geminis could start to become very negative, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Your negativity, it's not constructive, but Mars is biquintile Saturn, and so with Mars biquintile Saturn, it's possible that you might want to use your negativity for your own purposes, and it could be that you can really look at things in the worst possible light, for sure, but do it in quite a constructive way, almost enjoy doing it. And sometimes when you're seeing things in a negative light, there is a creativity there. If everything is positive all the time, well, that's miserable, isn't it? I mean, it is. I mean, you need to have balance. You need to have yin and yang. And as a Gemini, you know that more than anyone else. You know that if you go too far in one direction, well, you've got to create balance. And it may be that you could be in a position where you have to create some negativity, perhaps as a defense, perhaps as a foil to certain other people. Maybe other people are going too far. Maybe they're being too positive. And if that's the case, then you are the perfect person to bring everyone down to earth. Cancer. This weekend, you probably have time to do things, on your own, your way. I mean, there may be distractions, that's true, but you can do what matters, and you know that there are certain things that matter, and you perhaps are also aware that you don't need much in the way of sort of outside support. I mean, the moon is, it's in Sagittarius, but it's in mutual reception to Jupiter. And so the moon and Jupiter are in each other's signs. And that does give you a great deal of strength. And it also means that your organizing power is on, really good form. So if you want to change something isn't to your liking, then making that change should be, very easy, and there's really nothing that has to be explained. And also Cancer, it might be a time to, reconsider your lifestyle, certain aspects of your lifestyle. Perhaps this weekend you're going to be more focused than usual on sort of health and well-being, and you'll be wondering how you can make yourself feel sort of fitter and happier. And with that moon mutual reception, the moon in mutual reception to Jupiter, I think that you can, really take advantage of that. This is the great thing about Jupiter being in Cancer. Jupiter being in Cancer until June. I mean, Jupiter is a positive force. It's a force for good, and it's also quite protective. And so you will know how to protect yourself, and you will know that if you're doing something wrong or unwise or careless, you'll be able to bring yourself sort of back into line. And so I think that this weekend, really do concentrate on what matters to you, and there shouldn't really be any feeling of obligation. You shouldn't be obliged to do anything. I mean, that you have to do things, but you don't have to be told by anyone what needs to be done. And at the same time, I think that for you, things should run pretty smoothly. And if you want things to happen, they will happen. And you can, if need be someone who is quite encouraging, and people will like to have you around, and you will at the same time have a certain responsibility to you. Not everyone is responsible. Other people might be going off on their tangents. They might be talking too much. They might be concentrating on the wrong things, but you know what matters, and in your own gentle way you'll be able to sort of bring people sort of into line. But you don't want to get crowded out. You don't have to be surrounded by people. As I said right at the beginning, you can do things your way, and too many people around you, well, you do have to think about your health and well-being. and you are quite sensitive, especially now, and I mean sensitive, in a good sense, of the word, being sensitive to what's good for you and what's bad for you. And if you know that something is bad for you, or rather you feel that something is bad for you, then you're right, and you need to sort of take evasive action. But again, it doesn't have to be dramatic. You can sort of quietly move away, drift into the background and disappear into your own secure world. So that's the kind of day it is, or rather the kind of weekend it is. And I don't think that there's really too much that you have to worry about. Leo, you're stronger than you perhaps realize. When I say stronger, I'm thinking about that more in a kind of an interpersonal way. There's something about you that's difficult to ignore, and if you want to be paid attention to, you can certainly get people to sit up and listen. You've definitely got something that can't be ignored, and there is certainly a serious side to that. You are a serious person. People will take you seriously, and they will kind of gravitate your way. But it's not all serious, because the moon is in Sagittarius. The moon in Sagittarius, well, that is a good sign for the moon to be in, especially as it's in mutual reception to Jupiter, and it's a fire sign. Leo is a fire sign, and I think that you'll have little difficulty telling people about yourself, telling people about your priorities, and also enjoying yourself. Enjoyment does matter, and the moon in Sagittarius on Saturday does make a sextile to the sun, and this sextile to the sun is just kind of easygoing and harmonious, and things should run fairly smoothly. I don't think it's going to be especially dramatic, but maybe for you it's not an especially dramatic weekend. You don't need drama, and if you stick to what what you believe in, then I think that things should work very well. And don't forget, Leo, that Mars is now in Scorpio. Okay, Mars has been in Scorpio for the best part of a week, but that does change the emphasis. And with Mars in Scorpio, you do have to sort of concentrate on the things that matter, and you don't have to go out of your way. And you might indeed feel that this weekend is a time to really establish who you are in a way that is respectful to your own creative needs, but that also does have a certain seriousness to it. And so perhaps you can sort of build yourself up, build up your strength, and make it clear what is important to you. So it's a weekend that is, I would have said, solid, but I'm not suggesting that it's going to be especially exciting. But you can enjoy yourself up to a point, and you can be respected, and people will listen to you. So really, there's not much to complain about. Virgo. Mercury is doing stuff. I mean, Mercury is in a rather strange position. I mean, it's in Libra. We know it's in Libra. I mean, there's nothing strange about Mercury being in Libra, and I've already talked about Mercury in Libra at some length, and what that means if you're a Virgo. And it's broadly speaking is a time when you're quite concerned about what you have, what you don't have. And Mercury is making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus. Now, that Mercury sesquiquadrate Uranus is agitating, can be agitating. Certainly there are things that might bother you. Perhaps it relates to money. And if financial matters come up with Mercury sesquiquadrate Uranus, then yeah, you might get disturbed, and you might feel that you have to look after your own needs, and that you might have to be open and honest. Especially as the moon is in Sagittarius. I mean, with the moon in Sagittarius, a lot of people are inclined to being open and honest, and I think you can be open and honest as well, especially when it comes to matters relating to your fundamental security. But going back to a position of Mercury, if we look at the midpoints that Mercury is on, let me just show you the 90-degree dial for Mercury, and so there's the 90-degree dial, and there is Mercury. You can see that's Mercury, and what we're looking at for is the midpoints that Mercury is on. And Mercury is on the sort of Mars-Saturn midpoint, it's on the Mars-Neptune midpoint, and it's on the Mars-Aries midpoint. So Mercury, your ruler, is on a number of midpoint pairs that link with Mars. And this could be very defensive. And you may feel that you absolutely must do something to look after yourself. And you might be aware with Mercury on the Mars-Neptune midpoint that things are not as easy as they look. That things could perhaps sort of disintegrate into chaos very quickly. I'm not saying they are going to disintegrate into chaos, but you just are taking an overly cautious view, particularly with Mercury on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And that is important, because Mercury on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, remember, Mars and Saturn are in biquintile with each other anyway. And so it's quite an important aspect. Mars Saturn, I've talked about Mars biquintile Saturn. It can be about being deliberately serious, deliberately looking at things from the worst perspective, and perhaps sort of floating off onto rather sort of grim tangents, perhaps relating to death and the end of things. And so with Mercury on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, it really reinforces that biquintile, and it may say something about how you express yourself and your general view. And so Virgos are not taking anything for granted at the moment, and as far as Virgos are concerned, perhaps you feel that you live in a dangerous world, and there are threats, and you need to protect yourself at every turn. And this is probably the right attitude, but at the same time you have to consider what kind of impact you are having. And don't forget, with that Mercury sesquiquadrate Uranus, you're capable of saying things which could be hurtful, and you perhaps don't mean to be quite as hurtful as it actually turns out. It's a mistake, perhaps, but at the same time, you know that you're living in a serious world, and you have to take a serious approach, and you can certainly see how bad things could get. And there is something kind of Virgoan about all of this. I mean, Virgos don't get caught by sort of illusion. It's all going to be fine, don't worry, it's going to be great. Well, Virgo, that it's not necessarily going to be great, and it just could be a weekend where you want to be very protective. And sometimes it really is best to look at things from a really negative view, because when you're looking at things from a negative view, you're inclined to be protective and to ensure yourself from potential mishaps, though you don't want to be so negative that it sort of influences your cognitions. And there's no need to be depressed about things. And I mean, when I say depressed, I don't mean that in a clinical sense. It's just seeing things in an unrealistically negative light, because realism can work both ways. I mean, realism it's not just about not being too positive, it's also about not being too negative. And so, Virgo, it's important that you're able to stick to the facts and stick to the way things really are. Libra. There are still planets in Libra, as you know. In fact, the Sun has only just gone into Libra. And so, it's important that you continue to make the most of this. And there's still that grand trine in air signs, which I've been talking about at some length. And that grand trine in air should, for you, continue to work. It should continue to be a force for good, and it encourages you to look beyond your sort of immediate existence, get in touch, with Uranus and Pluto, these heavy-duty transpersonal planets, which, because of this trine, they're communicating something to you. They're communicating to you something about what you can do. They're telling you about the future. And additionally, we've now got the moon in Sagittarius. And so, the good thing about moon in Sagittarius is it allows you to move beyond the realm of ideas, and you can start to think about the excitement of the ideas, because ideas on their own can be just pretty boring. However spectacular they seem on paper, where's the energy? They're not going anywhere. But the moon in Sagittarius does provide some energy. And right at the beginning of a weekend, we've got the moon opposition Uranus. We've got the moon making a sextile to the sun. And so from a sort of astrological view, we can see that as the creation of a kite. So there is a triangle of the kite: Sun in Libra, Uranus in Aquarius, Pluto in Aquarius, Uranus in Gemini, and then the moon opposition Uranus. So that kind of allows things to come together. And so Libra, you might find the energy, find the fire, and that perhaps allows you to tell people about it. I think that at the moment, Libra, there's something about you that is exciting. The excitement was building up over the week, but now that the moon has moved into Sagittarius, you can actually sort of demonstrate that excitement and give people an image of the way things could be. And so, don't just keep things to yourself. See what other people have got to offer. Now, not everyone is going to understand you, and even if you're completely alone, maybe that doesn't matter either. Something sort of escalates. It moves away from a realm of ideas to the realm of possibility, and at the same time, you can really start to make connections. But I think that you can discuss what's on your mind. You can tell people about it. There is a message that you have to deliver, not have to deliver. You might want to deliver, and that message is excitement is exciting. And so, this weekend, try to make the most of things, and don't be put off by people, especially at the end of the weekend. At the end of the weekend, Mars does make a biquintile to Saturn, and with Mars biquintile Saturn, you might find that some people are being unusually or unreasonably restrained, and they're being sort of almost negative for the sake of it. And people who perhaps should know better, and they're not giving you the enthusiasm you want. But don't be put off. It's not about other people, it's about you. And different people are going to respond to you in different ways. Some people are going to be universally positive. Other people may, in the end, with that Mars biquintile Saturn, appear unresponsive and not sympathetic, and that's the way they are. It shouldn't really have an impact on you, because it's you that matters. And this grand trine in air signs, it doesn't happen very often. Sun in Libra, trine Uranus, trine Pluto. Okay, it will happen again next year at the end of September 2026. But why not make the most of it now? While this grand trine is in action. So I think that this weekend does look good, and I think that you will get support if you want support, but don't expect everyone to be supportive. And if you don't get any support, it doesn't matter, because as I just said, it's you that it's all about. And if you remember that, then things should be great. Scorpio. Mars is obviously in your sign, and it's going to stay in your sign for some time. And the question is, what is Mars doing in your sign? Well, Mars is making a biquintile to Saturn on Sunday, and this biquintile is probably going to be a feature of the whole weekend. And you could argue that this biquintile between Mars and Saturn is quite scorpionic in its nature. So if we think about Mars and Saturn and what that pair means, it can be rather negative. It can be frustrated. It can feel that there are things blocking you. You can't do everything that you want. That the world is sort of intrinsically negative and not supportive. So that's the negative side to that pair. But this is a biquintile. And biquintiles are about willpower, and they're also about what you are trying to create. And with Mars biquintile Saturn, you might find yourself trying to create a particular atmosphere, an atmosphere that is maybe rather negative, rather difficult, and there's a sense that things aren't necessarily going to have a happy ending. I mean, that's the impression you want to give, and you're not going to be very sympathetic to other people's mindless positivity. I mean, that might be how it works, particularly towards the end of a weekend, and you might just be trying your hardest to be negative and to downplay everything because it feels like the right thing to do. And this might also reflect in the way you present yourself. Perhaps focusing on sort of maybe dark colours. You think of dark colours when you think of Mars and Saturn, and it's not quite like you're dressing up to go to a funeral, but part of you, Scorpio, might be inclined that way. And again, it is a biquintile. You're doing it for a reason, and you feel that this is the best approach. And it may be you reason that by being negative, you're kind of making yourself stronger. And we mustn't forget that Mars is in Scorpio. Mars is in its own sign in Scorpio, and so that's the impression you might want to give. And I think you have to interpret what I've just said, because I've been talking with astrological symbols, and you've got to kind of make it. You've got to make it real for you. And how is it that you need to downplay everything and perhaps to bring other people down to earth? And because I think that the Mars quintile Saturn is your friend. I think it's really helping you achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve. And don't forget also that Mars is still making a square to Pluto, and that Mars square Pluto, okay, it was exact. I think it was exact on Wednesday, but it's still pretty close. And with Mars square Pluto, you are serious and you are strong and you are very focused on what is important to you, and it is all about you. And you're not really in the mood for compromising. It's not at the moment. It's not a very sociable time. It's not sociable in the sense that you want to make a real effort to get on with people. Not really. You do value your independence and your particular interpretation of this word independence, and people have to just accept it or just go away. And that might be the impression you're trying to give. Sagittarius, the moon is in your sign all weekend long, and it's making a load of lunar aspects. It's making an opposition to Uranus. It's making a sextile to Pluto, sextile to the Sun. It's always good having moon sextile the Sun. Plus, the moon is in mutual reception to Jupiter, your ruler. So the moon and Jupiter are in each other's signs. So Sagittarius, I think that to my mind looks pretty good. I think that you can be the center of attention. You can, if you really want, be the life and soul of the party with that moon sextile the Sun. Even though that moon sextile the Sun might not be exact, you've still got the moon in Sagittarius, Sun in Libra. That's good, because Libra and Sagittarius are two signs that don't really have any conflict with each other. They sort of complement each other, and so I think that this weekend you don't have to be in any one place for too long. You can keep moving, you can keep active, and don't forget also your own needs and ambitions. I mean, on Saturday the moon is square Venus, so you've got Venus in Virgo, moon in Sagittarius. I'm hoping, Sagittarius, that with that square you're going to be thinking about what needs to be done. Think ahead, think about next week. It may be Saturday, it may be a holiday for you, but still there might be things you can do which can help safeguard the future. That might be about talking to people, someone who has influence, or someone who could be useful, maybe in a financial sense or a career sense, or just in terms of what your overall goals are. And so everyone can be useful, and having an ever so slightly transactional approach on Saturday may not be such a bad thing. So don't waste Saturday. I think that Sunday is perhaps a bit different. There is sort of less pressure on Sunday. You might find that not everyone is on your wavelength. People have their own way of doing things. Remember, there's a Mars biquintile Saturn on Sunday. So on Sunday, a lot of people are trying to develop a sort of a particular style, and some people are trying to be quite distant, and people are sort of putting up boundaries, putting up walls. But that shouldn't worry you too much. But overall, Sagittarius, I'd probably say that you should be focusing your energies on Saturday rather than Sunday. Sunday, I don't think is necessarily going to be a super dynamic day, but I think it'll be okay. The moon will still be moving through your sign. The moon is making a sextile to Mercury, so you can get on with the right people, but do try to focus your energies on Saturday rather than Sunday. Capricorn. There is something serious about this weekend, which I've been talking about over the course of my descriptions of the 12 signs. And you could say that this seriousness is encapsulated by a biquintile between Mars and Saturn. And of course, that Mars biquintile Saturn is relevant to you because Saturn is your ruler. And this Mars biquintile Saturn, it's going to work for different people in different ways. Now, as far as you're concerned, what you're trying to do is you're trying to incorporate Mars into your way of being. So Mars is sort of symbolic of energy, getting your way, perhaps being ever so slightly warlike, and maybe Capricorn, as the weekend progresses, you're thinking about how can you have more of an impact. I mean, you already have an impact. People are paying attention to you. People are noticing you. But as far as you're concerned, that impact could go further. You could be more powerful. And so with Mars biquintile Saturn, you might be firstly thinking about what you could do and having a real sort of will. What do you want? What would you like to happen? Harnessing that willpower. And it's not entirely easy. Part of you, Capricorn, would just like to do nothing and just be ignored and just stay away from everyone. But that's not entirely satisfactory, because if you are on your own, if you are isolated, what kind of power can you bring to bear? Well, not a lot. And so, by the end of the weekend, as the moon moves into late Sagittarius, you're thinking about, well, what do you actually need to do? How do you need to present yourself? And, what needs to change? And perhaps this Mars bit biquintile Saturn allows you to make some changes in yourself. It requires a lot of effort. It's not easy, but you make these changes, and that kind of creates the right atmosphere for yourself, the right vibe, the right aura for yourself as you move into Monday, because, of course, Monday, the moon will be in Capricorn, it will be in your sign, and that kind of, represents a sort of a new beginning. So I think that, this weekend, there are things to do. I think that there are ways in which you can start to boost your own power, work out how to boost your power, but it's perhaps a process which you're doing in your own way, and you're just getting ready for Monday, because Monday, new week, and I think that you can really hit next week running. So I think that there is something to look forward to there. Aquarius. Don't forget that the Grand Trine in air signs it's still there, hasn't gone away this weekend, and so do utilize it. Sun, Uranus, Pluto, all in trine with one another, and if there's something you want to do, then go and do it. If you're looking for excitement, then I think you really can find it, and perhaps this Grand Trine in air, which I've been talking about for quite a lot over the last week, perhaps the problem has been that there just wasn't the spark. Yeah, you had all these ideas, but there wasn't that sort of energy to bring them into being, to really make an impression. And now we've got the moon moving through Sagittarius, a fire sign, and you could say that moon in Sagittarius is the spark. And at the beginning of a weekend, the moon makes an opposition to Uranus, and so the moon was turning a Grand Trine into a into a kite. So you had the moon opposition Uranus, and so that was the moon opposition Uranus. There was forming sort of the spine of the kite, and the moon was making a sextile to the sun and sextile to Pluto. So it kind of comes together, and so where is that spark? What do you need to do to sort of see it through? And it could be that you have been too focused on yourself, and you need to sort of reach out and see what other people have to say. So at the beginning of a weekend, maybe you should be talking about your ideas, finding people to interact with, getting their feedback, and that might all be very positive. And additionally, this weekend you are able to really communicate very well. You can come over as someone who is interesting and clever, and yes, it's sort of intelligent and creative, and so you can really show yourself off in the best possible light, certainly in terms of what you say. And so really try to circulate as much as possible over the weekend, and the more freedom you give yourself, the better you'll feel. And by the end of a weekend, you may want to take things further. You may be thinking about how can you be more assertive? How can you not just be at the center of things, but get people to do things your way? And that's because there is a biquintile between Mars and Saturn, and so Mars, an energy planet, making a biquintile to Saturn. You want to really use Mars. Mars is in Scorpio. Mars is really strong in Scorpio, and so you want to make it part of who you are. And it's not natural. It's not something that's very spontaneous, but it's something that can be made to happen, because this is a biquintile. Biquintile is not a spontaneous aspect. It's about creating something through your own will. So if you feel that you're not strong enough, or you're not having as much of an impact as you'd like to be having, well, you can change things. You can really use the power of your personality to make yourself stronger and more effective. So if you're feeling that you don't have enough strength, don't worry about it. You think about it. Let the grand trine in air help you, and you can start to think about what strategies you need to develop. And if you can do that, then I think by the end of a weekend you can have a lot of confidence and a strong sense of who you are and what you can do, and also who you can influence. Pisces. The moon is in Sagittarius throughout the weekend, and the moon in Sagittarius, it does make quite a lot of aspects, particularly on Saturday. It makes an opposition to Uranus, sextile Pluto, sextile the Sun. It's always good having moon sextile the Sun. It's a very harmonious aspect. And the moon in Sagittarius is also in mutual reception to Jupiter, which is your ruler. And so the overall situation looks fortunate, and it is a weekend where I think you should be able to project yourself very well, and also you shouldn't forget about what is important. What is important to you, and just because it's a weekend doesn't mean you have to slack off. Again, especially on Saturday, there are things you can do to advance your agenda and to get what you want. And so, if you're an ambitious Piscean, then keep going. It's not the end of a week. There are things to do on Saturday, and you are going to be quite inspired in your own way. And if you want to be a leader, you can be a leader. And even if other people are not involved in things, you can work on your own ambitions. Whatever your ambitions are, whatever you're trying to get together, you can make connections which in the past you perhaps had found it difficult to sort of get it together. You weren't quite sure where things were going, but suddenly things are starting to make sense, and you need to do things your way, and you shouldn't be put off by other people's reactions. People's reactions could be difficult to predict. I mean, there is a sesquiquadrate between Mercury and Uranus, and that sesquiquadrate might encourage certain people to behave in a way that is quite sort of erratic, and they might say things which on the surface seem to be disturbing, but it shouldn't worry you. This weekend you can make the decisions, and you have a clear idea about what is important, and you're also able to, on an emotional level, create a sort of a healthy distance from the world around you. You are detached, but you're also emotional because you're a Piscean. But you have this detachment which is not unhealthy. Perhaps it's because you just allow things to wash over you. If you don't resist, people can say things, people can do things, but it just doesn't matter. It just goes past you, goes through you, whatever, because you're not resisting it, and you're not making anything too significant. And this detachment does give a boost to your agency, and it makes you a lot stronger. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was a hexagram number 15, which is modesty. And modesty is pretty self-evident here. It's not drawing attention to oneself. It's not making a special effort to look good. There is a view that modesty is about a lack of adornment. We don't adorn ourselves. We don't try to be someone that we're not. And this means that there may be opportunities to show off how clever we are. We want to demonstrate that we can do something. Perhaps we want to take the lead, but that's not what modesty is about. And the thing about this hexagram, modesty, is it doesn't have any moving lines. And so if there are no moving lines, then where is it going? Well, it's going nowhere. And perhaps this reinforces the idea of modesty. Modesty doesn't have any plans. Modesty doesn't have any wonderful ambitions. It just tries to be itself, and it is authentic. I mean, that's a key point about modesty. You're not trying to be someone you're not. And that is the right approach for this weekend. And I'm not sure if this was necessarily reflected by the astrology, but it does indicate the best approach. And in order to understand modesty, because there are no moving lines, because we don't necessarily have a great deal of information to work on, because no moving lines, it means it doesn't move to a different hexagram, we can look at the nuclear hexagram. And the nuclear hexagram is hexagram number 40, which is deliverance. And deliverance is about escape. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Deliverance represents a danger that we are faced by. This danger is right in front of us, and we need to find a way of escaping it. And because it's deliverance, it's saying, yes, there is a way to escape it. And, we haven't got, all the time in the world, but then this is not the main hexagram, it's just a nuclear hexagram. And so going back to modesty, if we see this in terms of deliverance, we are perhaps concerned about things. Maybe that's underlying it. There are situations that we're worried about, that we've perhaps got ourselves into, that we're not very comfortable about, and how we're going to get out. And if we want to escape, then the best approach is to have a low profile, is not to draw attention to ourselves, not to show off, because it might be great to show off, get favourable attention, but we are potentially creating a complication there. We are creating a footprint, and this weekend we should be trying to avoid making a footprint. We want to just quietly perhaps escape from something. That may be part of it, maybe part of a reason why we want to be modest, why we don't want to draw attention to ourselves, why we, in terms of adornment, we don't want to adorn ourselves at all. We don't want to dress in a way that gets anyone's attention. We want to just be part of the scenery. And that is the best way of handling this weekend, I think. So let me finish with this shooting in Dallas. I know it happened a long time ago, but I thought I would briefly look at it. So there was a shooting on Wednesday in Dallas, and it was outside an ICE office. And of course, the ICE being the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and of course ICE have been getting a lot of publicity recently with Trump's sort of deportations and people being rounded up. I'm not giving an opinion on it. I'm just saying this is the case. And so, as you can imagine, given all of this attention to ICE in the news, that some people who have access to guns, that get upset about it, and they feel they have to do something about it, and they may have their own they may have their own issues. And of course you have sort of copycat shootings. You had the shooting of Charlie Kirk, and so people have been sort of perhaps encouraged by that shooting to try the same thing themselves. And in this case, someone he went to this ICE facility at a really early in the morning. I mean, I think it was at 20 to 7 in the morning, 6:40 in the morning. So here is, let's look at the chart. So here is a chart for the shooting. Yeah, it was at 6:40 a.m. in Dallas. And so I don't even know if there's anything especially special about the place, but there's certainly something special about the astrology, in that there was an exact Mars-Pluto square at this time. Mars was at 1 degree 27 Scorpio, Pluto was at 1 degree 27 Aquarius, and the moon was exactly conjunct Mars, exactly square Uranus. I noticed this this aspect, moon making an exact conjunct Mars at the same time as the moon was exactly square Pluto, these three planets really coming together. I mean, I did notice it, I did point it out when I did the video for Wednesday, but I wasn't really thinking of anything like this. I mean, I know that people were killed, but it was not an especially dramatic event, because now I'm afraid people do judge events by the body count, and only 2 people were killed, and that includes the perpetrator. And it happened at a really, really early in the morning. I mean, 6:40 a.m. I mean, what is going on then? Now, as far as the chart itself is concerned, okay, I think the Moon, Mars, Pluto link is really important, and it could be that the shooter was really drawn to that Mars square Pluto, that exact Mars square Pluto. That's why perhaps the shooting happened at 6:40 a.m. rather than sort of later in the day, when there would have been more people around and it would have been more easier to spot targets. I think the person who was perpetrator killed, wasn't even an ICE agent. I think they were someone who had been taken in by ICE. So it seemed a very sort of strange thing to do. And of course you have Sun opposition Neptune, relatively close to the Sun opposition Neptune. So it's a very sort of confused thing to do. Now, as far as the midpoints are concerned at that particular time, so when we're looking at an event like this, we should be looking at the ascendant and the midheaven, because the ascendant and the midheaven, they're the planets that, so not the planets, they're the points that move quickly, but maybe very particular to the time and the place, and so looking at the ascendant and the midheaven, I don't see anything especially dramatic here, and this may suggest that really it wasn't an especially dramatic event. And so here is the ice shooting, and if we put the ascendant on, there's the ascendant. What midpoints are there? I don't see anything. I don't regard this as being especially dramatic. So I mean, I know I'm talking about it, but I'm just seeing what can we spot from this shooting, and I don't see a great deal. Now, as far as the shooter is concerned, I have a speculative date. Well, for the person, what is it? Well, he's dead, so I'm not. So, do I say the alleged shooter, the person who is being named as a shooter? And I don't have a date of time of birth. Now, the date of birth, several sources have said that Joshua Jan, who has been accused of the shooting, was born on April the 30th, 1996. Now, he's dead. Did he kill himself? And so here is his horoscope, and he did the shooting, or was accused of this shooting at the time of his Saturn return. So he's 29 years old. So his Saturn is at 2 degrees 40 Aries. Now Saturn at the time of his shooting was at 28 Aries. So it wasn't exactly there, but this whole Saturn return thing, it's close enough to think that this is a Saturn return event. And I think he had issues with the government. He had been something of a drifter. He'd moved from sort of job to job. I think he'd had a job in Washington State picking marijuana, but he was not considered particularly reliable, and so he was let go. And we don't have a time of birth for him, so I don't know where the moon is. So potentially he had moon opposition Saturn. I think he's likely to have had moon opposition Saturn. His moon would have been anywhere between 29 Virgo and 13 Libra, something like that. So the Saturn could have been opposition his moon, but it's not a chart that I find particularly interesting. I mean, he has Mars square Neptune, and sort of Mars in Aries square Neptune. So if you've got Mars in Aries, perhaps you want to do something with that Mars in Aries. You might be a drifter. You might not seem to have any focus to your life. But if you've got Mars in Aries, there could be an attraction to violence and to guns, particularly if it's square Neptune. And so Mars square Neptune, as an aspect, can be difficult. You have Mars in Aries, but where are you going to actually assert yourself with Mars in Aries? So Neptune, it might just go all over the place, and this perhaps describes the shooting in Dallas. It was just chaotic. He just sprayed he sprayed the place with bullets. He didn't by all accounts, hit his target. It was just random and chaotic, and he, in the end, I think, killed himself. He did write things on the bullets, so he was perhaps copying that from the killing of Charlie Kirk, or at least the reports about the killing of Charlie Kirk. So I think that Mars Neptune is is the main aspect there. That is the aspect in his chart that we really do need to consider. And I'll also look how Mercury is involved in it as well. So he's got Mercury semi-sextile Mars, and Mercury is Mercury's trine Neptune. But not really a great deal to report there. I don't find that chart especially interesting. And finally, there's the horoscope of Ice. So Ice was formed on March the 1st, 2003, and the horoscope of Ice. Well, Ice, if I've got this right, was set up in a response to 9/11. So after 9/11, security became much tighter, became much more of a concern, and so agencies like ICE came into being, and so ICE doesn't have anything in Cancer. You'd almost expect something to be in Cancer with the ICE chart, because it is about securing the homeland. It's also enforcement, and so there is an enforcement aspect to Cancer, but that is not really what it's about. And instead we see Mars sextile Uranus. I mean, Mars sextile Uranus strikes me as being a bit chaotic. There is the force element to Mars sextile Uranus, and doing things in a way that might be rather spontaneous and chaotic, Mars sextile Uranus. And if we look at that Mars, you might say with Mars and the ICE, if we compare ICE with the horoscope of Joshua Jan, so if we put ICE on the outer wheels, what is ICE doing to Joshua Jan? Why does he feel so inclined to attack this ICE office? So there is Joshua Jan's Mars square Neptune, and so ICE's Mars is trine Joshua Jan's Mars, and ICE's Uranus is sextile the Mars. So you think about trine as being a fortunate aspect, but just something about ICE maybe makes him annoyed, or it just makes him feel that he just wants to attack an office. It's all very straightforward as far as he's concerned. Mars trine Mars, so that could be a way of looking at it. And also ICE's Venus. ICE has Venus in Capricorn at 29 Capricorn, and it's on his Neptune. So his Neptune in Capricorn, maybe that's it says something about his generation. People born in the mid 1990s, and some of them might respond to the way ICE presents itself. ICE is Venus in Capricorn. Something a bit harsh about that Venus in Capricorn that ICE has. Especially as that that Venus is semi-sextile Uranus, and so also his Mars is square ICE's Venus, and so that may be another cause of antagonism. But I don't think that there's a great deal to say about this. Saturn, the Saturn, ICE's Saturn is at 22 degrees 11 Gemini, so it's right on his Venus. So that is perhaps a more significant contact from what he'd seen of ICE. Perhaps that Saturn on his Venus just makes it feel that it's an organization that bothers him, and he has to do something about it. He has to attack its offices. Which brings me on to one final point about ICE, is that ICE has its Saturn at 22 Gemini, and of course that would that rings a bell, doesn't it? 22 Gemini. So Isis Saturn at 22 Gemini, and that means that it sort of links up with the horoscope of Trump. So Trump has his so there's Isis Saturn. So that Isis Saturn is right on Trump's sun and also his north node. And you might say, well, Isis Saturn is on Trump's sun, that somehow that is a negative, but maybe it's not so negative. Maybe that Saturn being on Trump's full moon, because Isis Saturn is opposition Trump's moon, it's conjunct his sun, and so ICE as an organization may be something that can give substance to his sun and the moon, give substance to his policies. Whatever people are saying, about Trump, and is he doing anything? You can see that ICE is always doing something, and so ICE through that Saturn may be giving manifestation to Trump's natal new moon. At least that's a possibility. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about the subject of this shooting. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.